Hello, friends. My name is Stanley Cooley, and today I would like to talk to you about anticipatory grief. What is anticipatory grief? Anticipatory grief is grief that we are having for losing a loved one before they're actually gone. This could come from different illnesses like cancer or dementia, uh, various illnesses that can prolong the process, and they could even be in hospice for quite a while. And we are going through the grieving process kind of as though we've already lost them because we know that the death is coming. There are also people who have a psychosis that is anticipating. They are anticipating the death of a loved one. That loved one might not even be sick, but that is a whole nother subject that needs to be dealt with at a different point in time, and there is a special therapy for that. But let's talk about anticipating someone's death. This could be illness that, we think about cancer, we think about Alzheimer's, we think about different illnesses. And some of these illnesses can take a long period of time to take the process, to get them to the end of the line and they would actually pass away. For instance, MS is a big illness in our country, and they don't know what causes it, but they know that people with primary progressive MS, there are three types of MS. I should list those. There's relapsing remitting MS, there's secondary progressive MS, and then there's primary progressive MS. Relapsing remitting MS means that the symptoms come and go over time. And secondary progressive MS is where they will have the symptoms come back, but then they will just keep progressing forward and keep progressing forward, a slow downhill climb with that. And then there's primary progressive MS. That is where they'll be diagnosed from the first moment they're diagnosed. It's going to be a continual process of decline. And sometimes people around them won't notice unless it's somebody who's actually living in the household, noticing all the little different character traits and personality traits. And this brings up a whole different level of anticipatory grief when you think about that versus, let's say, a fast moving cancer. Um, so the person going through this anticipatory grief with cancer, a few months to a year or so, and the loved one's passed, and then they can go through the actual grieving process and move forward. With a disease such as MS, it could be others like muscular dystrophy. There are other diseases that just gradually tear away at a person until they pass away. And with those kind of cases, the anticipatory grief can be much greater because it's ongoing. I spoke with a counselor who said it is continual grieving. You are continually in the grieving process when you're dealing with something like this because they are not the same person. They'll take, for instance, the Alzheimer's patients. They aren't the same person they were the day before, and sometimes the next day. Sometimes it's a week where you see the differences. And the Alzheimer's patients a lot of times will start lashing out at their caregiver, and the same can happen with MS patients. And so now you have the loved one who is dealing with this disease and anticipating that someday this disease is going to do something that's going to take my loved one's life. And at the same time, you're dealing with the disease is taking my loved one from me because it's changing my loved one on a regular basis. This can be very difficult for a person to deal with, especially as time goes on. As the years go on and the disease slowly deteriorates their loved one, and the relationship becomes different, the conversations become different, their abilities become different. one day they could be able to walk fine, then the very next day or the next few days or week they could need a walker because now a lesion has happened on a certain part of their spine or brain that has caused them to be off balance or drag a foot. Um, so then the loved one uh, who is probably doing the caretaking sees that person going through that. That causes them pain. It causes them sorrow, anger, even. Um, and then it also means that they have to do more in helping this loved one with their day to day task. So, this grief can also do things that can cause physical issues. So, the person going through the grieving uh, will be maybe showing physiological things like they're not eating like they should, or they may even be so despondent over their grief that they are not able to go out and do the daily task, paying the bills and going to the grocery store or being around other people because other people don't know what to say and they say the wrong thing and it just causes the pain to hurt even more. And and sometimes, they don't even want to eat because they're so despondent over their loved one's illness. So these are some things that can happen in anticipatory grief. So how do we deal with anticipatory grief? How does the counselor or therapist work with the client through this process? First and foremost, I think they need to have a place where they can speak freely and sound off, have a sounding board, so they can just express what they're going through. The counselor may give them, though, some homework, may give them some tasks to do. Uh, Write down all the things that you want to say to this loved one. Write down the grievances you may have had with this loved one. Bring them back. Let's talk about them. And they may do other things, like if there's unresolved business with that loved one, then they may do something like empty chair therapy, where they set an empty chair across from the grieving person and have that person talk to that loved one as though they're there. They do this in regular grief counseling sessions too, where if there's unfinished business or if it's prolonged grief, they will have that person talk to an empty chair as if that loved one was there. And again, I think this comes back to the feeling of being able to get those emotions out and express those emotions and work with them. Now, there is a little caveat to that. There are some cultures that have been raised to not express emotion at all. And so that will create a whole different scenario in the therapy sessions. In any case, any therapist needs to know their client, to get to know them, do a great intake interview so they know what they expect during therapy, and the therapist kind of gets an idea of the culture background and the family background and so forth. That way, the therapist will be able to better work with a client who may not be used to expressing the emotions that are within them. Now, there was something else that I really didn't mention in the physiological aspects of this is people who have been through incredibly traumatic losses in the past may not be able to deal with this anticipated loss that's coming up. And it can change things physiologically in a very dramatic way. Um, there were people in Africa who were forced to watch their loved ones be slaughtered, and then they became blind because they could not stand what they saw. And so um, there could be some very severe physiological things that take place, and the counselor therapist needs to be ready to deal with that person on those issues and with those issues. and may even have to refer for some medical attention, as well as these people may not be eating properly and so forth, as we mentioned earlier. So, as we deal with anticipatory grief, we need to understand that it's going to be much the same as anybody grieving a loved one that's already gone, except it deepens it because it's an ongoing process, and it's um, a continual thing, and they go through over and over and over again. So the therapist needs to be in tune to this and help them to pull out of that downward spiral, so to speak. I hope you've enjoyed this video on anticipatory grief. I hope it's been very helpful, and I hope everyone has a fabulous day.